Most people live as though the presence of God was somewhere far away, hidden behind the clouds, waiting to be summoned through words, rituals, or pleading prayers. This is the spiritual mistake that blinds humanity, the belief that the infinite is outside of oneself. We spend our days searching for that which has never been lost, calling upon that which has never departed. The divine cannot come closer. It is already the very breath that animates you, the light behind your seeing, the intelligence that beats your heart and thinks your thoughts. Yet nearly everyone seeks God as though he were an object to be found, a treasure buried in time or place. We create practices, doctrines, and philosophies to reach what has never been absent. The tragedy is not in the search itself, it is in the assumption that the search is necessary. When you begin from the sense of separation, you can only end in longing. But when you awaken to the truth that the kingdom of heaven is within consciousness, the journey ends where it began, in silent awareness. The soul's fulfillment is not achieved through effort, but through realization. You cannot earn what you already are. You cannot attract what is inseparable from you. The moment you stop striving to reach the divine and rest in stillness, the presence reveals itself as your own being. This realization dissolves the fear of lack, the craving for recognition, and the struggle for control. You understand that everything you sought to gain through the world was only the reflection of a forgotten wholeness within. The world tells you to strive, to plan, to accumulate, to make yourself complete through achievement. But Spirit whispers, be still and know. Every attempt to add to yourself is a denial of your sufficiency. Every anxious prayer for something you lack is a declaration that you believe in absence. And yet there is no absence in God, and there is no separation from what God is. So cease the endless search. Do not reach outward, turn inward. In the quiet awareness behind thought, behind emotion, behind the self that struggles to become, there abides the infinite perfection that has never moved, never changed, never needed to be found. There in the stillness of your own being, you will discover that you were never apart from the presence, only unaware of it. The illusion of separation. Most people mistakenly believe God or divine presence exists outside themselves, searching for what has never been absent. The futility of spiritual striving efforts, rituals, and doctrines aimed at finding God only reinforce the illusion that the divine is missing. The truth of inner realization, true awakening, comes not through seeking but through realizing that the divine presence already dwells within one's own consciousness. The stillness of awareness, spiritual fulfillment, arises in silence and stillness, when one stops struggling and simply knows their oneness with the infinite. The end of the search, when the mind ceases its outward quest, one recognizes that there was never any distance between oneself and God, only a lack of awareness of the unity that always is. The greatest misunderstanding that keeps humanity in bondage is the sense of separation from the divine. From early childhood, we are conditioned to believe that God is a distant power residing somewhere beyond reach. Perhaps in the sky, in sacred buildings, or in a realm far removed from human experience, we are taught to look upward, to call outward, and to hope for a response from a presence that seems detached from our daily lives. This illusion of separation becomes the root of all spiritual suffering, for as long as one believes that God is elsewhere, one remains a seeker, never a knower. In truth, there has never been any distance between the soul and its source. The life that animates you is not yours apart from God. It is the very expression of God itself, the breath moving through you, the awareness perceiving this moment, the intelligence guiding your thoughts. All are evidence of the divine presence manifesting as your being. Yet this simple truth is hidden by the constant movement of thought, the ceaseless search for fulfillment outside the self. Humanity lives as though disconnected from the very life that sustains it, wandering in a self-created desert, thirsting for water while standing in the midst of an infinite ocean. Because of this false belief in separation, people create endless systems of worship and devotion designed to bring them closer to God. They pray as if they must convince a distant deity to hear them. They perform rituals as if to gain favor. They follow doctrines as if salvation were a future event. But these efforts, sincere though they may be, only reinforce the idea that God is apart from the individual. Every act that begins from the premise of distance will end in disappointment because the foundation itself is built upon illusion. You cannot find what is not lost. You cannot reach what is already here. The sense of separation also breeds fear. When you believe that the divine is somewhere else, you begin to feel alone in a vast and uncertain world. You seek protection, provision, and peace from outer circumstances, hoping that through possessions, relationships, or achievements, you might fill the emptiness within. Yet no amount of outer success can restore the awareness of inner unity. Fear persists because at its core, it is the child of separation, the belief that there exists a me apart from the whole, vulnerable and incomplete. The awakening begins the moment you turn from outward seeking to inward knowing. Instead of asking for God to come to you, you begin to recognize that you live, move, and have your being within God. You discover that the presence is not an entity outside your life, but the essence of your life itself. This realization does not require effort or belief. It requires stillness, awareness, and surrender. When you become quiet enough to feel the rhythm of your own existence, you begin to sense that every heartbeat, every breath, every moment of awareness is an expression of divine love. When the illusion of separation dissolves, fear loses its power. You no longer strive to reach God through words or rituals. You rest in the knowing that there is no you and God, but only the one life expressing itself in infinite form. You understand that the same presence that flows through your being also sustains the stars, the oceans, the trees, and every living thing. This recognition brings a deep peace, a peace not dependent on conditions, because it is grounded in truth. The mind will resist this realization, for it has been trained to live through opposites, self and other, good and bad, heaven and earth. But as awareness deepens, these dualities fade, and what remains is the silent understanding that the divine has never been elsewhere. You begin to see that every moment, every experience, and every being is part of one unbroken wholeness. The illusion of separation disappears, and with it, the endless search for what has always been present. The human mind is constantly striving to understand, to reach, to become. This same restless motion seeps into the spiritual life, where it disguises itself as devotion, discipline, or the quest for enlightenment. Yet behind all this seeking lies a subtle assumption that we are apart from the divine and must somehow bridge the gap through effort. This is the quiet error that pervades almost all spiritual striving. The very act of searching implies absence, and so long as we believe something is missing, we cannot experience the completeness that already is. People spend lifetimes in pursuit of God, chasing after experiences, teachings, and practices, hoping each new revelation will bring them closer to the infinite. They repeat prayers, attend services, read sacred books, and follow teachers. All beautiful expressions when born of love, yet empty when driven by the hunger to attain what is already present. Every attempt to reach God as an external object pushes the realization further away. It is like a man standing in sunlight, searching for light with a lantern in his hand. His failure to see what already surrounds him is not due to lack of effort, but to misdirection of perception. This futile striving arises from the ego's need to control even the sacred. The mind wants a path it can follow, a set of steps it can master, a reward it can claim. But the spirit is not found by effort, for effort belongs to the realm of doing, while realization belongs to the realm of being. No amount of repetition or discipline can make the ocean more wet. No practice can make you more divine. All that striving can do is exhaust the illusion of separation until the seeker falls into silence and discovers that what he sought was never elsewhere. Even spiritual ambition, wanting to be holy, pure, or enlightened, can become a trap. These desires, though clothed in noble language, still revolve around the self-image. They whisper, "If I pray enough, meditate enough, serve enough, then I will become worthy of God's love." But God's love is not something to earn. It is the very nature of existence. To seek it as though it were conditional is to deny its constancy. Every breath you take is already divine communion. Every moment of awareness is already grace in motion. The effort to reach God blinds the soul to the truth that God is the one doing the reaching, the one being reached, and the space in between. The futility of spiritual striving is not an argument against spiritual practice. It is an invitation to transform the motive behind it. Meditation, prayer, study, and service are not means to obtain the divine, but ways to remember it. When they arise, from love and quiet joy, rather than the anxiety of incompleteness, they become doorways to awareness, rather than barriers to it. The shift is subtle but profound. Instead of practicing to get to God, you practice to rest in God. The movement changes from reaching outward to awakening inward. When striving ceases, stillness arises, and in that stillness, the presence reveals itself. Not as a vision, not as a voice, but as the quiet knowing that there is no separation to overcome. You begin to sense that your thoughts, your breath, and your being are all movements of one infinite consciousness. You realize that life itself is prayer, that every act of kindness, every moment of gratitude, every breath taken in awareness is the fulfillment of what the seeker once sought. It is only when the heart releases its demand to attain the divine that it becomes transparent to the divine. The striving mind dissolves, and what remains is simplicity, peace, and direct awareness of being. You understand that the journey was never toward God but within God, that the seeking was the veil and the stillness beneath it was always the destination. There comes a moment in every soul's journey when the endless search turns inward and the realization dawns that the divine was never absent. This is not an intellectual discovery, nor the reward of long study. It is a quiet awakening of consciousness. True realization is not something gained through learning or inherited from doctrine. It is a direct perception of what has always been true. When one awakens to this inner reality, the boundaries between the seeker and the sought dissolve. The self no longer stands apart from God, pleading for connection. Instead, awareness recognizes itself as the very expression of the infinite. This realization does not arrive through effort or discipline. It is born out of stillness, when the mind ceases its restless motion and the heart releases its clinging to outer forms. Something profound occurs. What remains is a silence that is not emptiness but fullness, a living presence that is felt rather than thought. This is the moment when you realize that the divine life is not something to be reached. It is what you are already living. Every breath, every thought, every act of awareness is a manifestation of that divine essence. The recognition of this truth changes the whole texture of existence. The world is no longer a battlefield where you must struggle for meaning. It becomes a mirror reflecting your own completeness. In this awakening, the distinction between sacred and ordinary disappears. You see the divine not only in temples or scriptures, but in the smallest moments of daily life, in the sound of rain, in the smile of a stranger, in the quiet beating of your heart. Everything that once appeared mundane reveals its spiritual radiance because consciousness has shifted from seeking to seeing. When you live in this realization, your actions no longer arise from fear, ambition, or desire for reward. They flow naturally, effortlessly from the awareness of unity. Service becomes love in motion. Prayer becomes silent. Gratitude and meditation become simple being. The great paradox is that nothing external changes when realization dawns. Yet everything is transformed. The same body moves. The same world surrounds you. Yet the inner quality of perception is utterly new. You no longer look outward for signs of divinity because you sense that all form and activity are expressions of one infinite life. This realization brings freedom, not the freedom to do as you wish, but freedom from the compulsion to seek. You rest in the certainty that nothing needs to be added or removed for wholeness to be. Many resist this truth because the mind is trained to equate growth with effort. We believe we must achieve enlightenment as if it were a goal on a distant horizon. But realization is not an attainment. It is the unveiling of what has always been. So the divine does not appear when you become worthy. It becomes visible when the illusion of unworthiness fades. This unveiling happens naturally as the clouds of thought and emotion part to reveal the sun that never ceased to shine. The grace of realization is not given from above. It is uncovered from within. When this awareness stabilizes, you begin to live with a quiet humility. You understand that there is no you who possesses truth. There is only truth revealing itself as you. You cease to claim wisdom or holiness, for such claims would belong to the separate self that no longer holds power. What remains is simplicity, gentleness, and peace. You walk through the world with open eyes, meeting all things with compassion. Because you see yourself in everything, the realization of the divine within you becomes the recognition of the divine everywhere. In that recognition, seeking ends and being begins. Stillness is not merely the absence of sound or activity, it is quiet in which truth reveals itself. Beneath the noise of thought and the endless movement of desire, there exists a silence that has never been disturbed. It is in this inner stillness that the presence of the divine is known not as an idea, not as a belief, but as direct experience. When the mind ceases its struggle to grasp, control, or define, what remains is awareness itself, open, vast, and untouched. In that awareness, the illusion of separation dissolves, and one perceives that the divine has never been apart from one's own being. Humanity has been conditioned to believe that action and achievement are the keys to fulfillment. Even in the spiritual realm, people believe they must do something to reach enlightenment. Pray harder, meditate longer, study more deeply. Yet all this effort keeps the mind restless and noisy. The stillness that reveals truth cannot be forced. It arises when striving ends. In that quiet, a gentle knowing awakens, the recognition that the presence you sought through words and effort has been silently dwelling within you all along. The stillness itself becomes the teacher, the prayer, and the revelation. In the silence of awareness, thought slows, emotion softens, and the sense of individuality begins to fade. You no longer experience yourself as a separate entity struggling against life, but as life itself unfolding effortlessly. This stillness is not an emptiness to be feared. It is fullness beyond measure. It is peace that requires no condition, joy that depends on no circumstance, love that flows without object. The world remains as it was, yet you perceive it through a new lens. Everything glows with quiet meaning because you see it through the eyes of presence. When you rest in this stillness, even ordinary actions take on a sacred quality. You do not withdraw from life or reject its movements. Rather, you move within it without being disturbed by it. You can act, speak, create, and serve. But all these arise from calm awareness rather than the turbulence of ego. This is true peace, not the fragile peace that depends on favorable conditions, but the peace that endures through change because it is rooted in the unchanging. The stillness of awareness is not something you must enter. It is what you are when the noise of the mind subsides. Many resist silence because it confronts them with the emptiness of the self they have built through years of thought and identity. To the mind, stillness feels like death, for the mind lives on activity and attention. But when one dares to remain in that silence, a greater life is discovered, a life untouched by birth or death, gain or loss. The stillness reveals that behind every movement, behind every sound, behind every thought, there is an awareness watching silently, eternally whole. That awareness is the true self, the divine presence expressing itself as consciousness. Living from this stillness transforms the way you meet the world. You no longer react to circumstances with fear or desire. You respond with understanding. You no longer chase after peace, for peace is now your nature. You no longer pray for signs of God, for every moment becomes a revelation of God. In stillness, prayer and answer are one. Question and truth are one. Seeker and sought are one. The still mind no longer seeks confirmation, it simply knows. The spiritual masters have always pointed toward this same truth, that stillness is the gateway to realization, not because it leads you to God, but because it unveils that you have never left God. When thought grows quiet, the presence that has always been there becomes undeniable. In that sacred silence, the heart recognizes itself as infinite, eternal, and whole. Nothing more needs to be achieved. Nothing more needs to be found. The saint, illness itself is fulfillment. There comes a moment when the ceaseless search for truth collapses under its own weight. And in that collapse, a profound clarity emerges. The heart realizes that there is nothing to find because nothing was ever lost. The long journey of seeking with all its prayers, struggles, and disciplines ends not in discovery but in recognition. You come to see that you were never apart from the presence you sought. It was there in every breath, every heartbeat, every quiet moment that went unnoticed while the mind looked elsewhere. The end of the search is not a defeat, it is liberation from illusion. The spiritual path begins in longing, a deep yearning to know, to feel, to return to something sacred. That longing is not wrong, it is the soul's call toward remembrance. But as the seeker matures, it becomes clear that the longing itself is the veil. Every time you say, "I must find God," you affirm that God is absent. Every time you strive for enlightenment, you reinforce the belief that you are unenlightened. The search sustains the separation it hopes to end. True realization dawns when you see through this paradox and surrender the very impulse to reach for what already is. When the search ends, stillness takes its place. You stop chasing experiences, teachers, and methods, and you begin to rest in simple awareness. The mind, weary from its endless pursuit, finally grows quiet, and in that quiet, something timeless reveals itself. You feel a gentle peace that asks for nothing, a quiet joy that depends on no condition. You understand that the divine has never been an object to obtain, but the very essence of your being. What changes is not the world, but the way you perceive it. The same sky, the same sounds, the same faces all shimmer with a light that was always there but unseen. This ending of the search does not make you passive. It makes you whole. You act but no longer from desire or fear. You love but not from need. You serve but without the sense of sacrifice. Life becomes spontaneous, effortless, like the unfolding of a flower that does not think about blooming. You realize that the presence you once sought in meditation, prayer, or nature is expressing itself through your every word, gesture, and breath. The journey home was never a movement through space or time. It was the awakening from a dream of distance. When this realization deepens, the division between you and life disappears. The world that once seemed external becomes an extension of your own being. You look upon others and see not strangers, but reflections of the same presence. Compassion flows naturally because there is no longer an other to fear or judge. The heart that once prayed for connection now radiates it effortlessly. You no longer wait for grace. You recognize that grace has always been the atmosphere of existence. Many resist this end because the ego fears extinction. It clings to the identity of the seeker, the one on the path, the one progressing toward light. But the truth cannot be owned. It can only be lived. When the seeker disappears, life itself becomes the teacher. You no longer interpret events as lessons given by a distant God. You see them as expressions of a presence that has never left you. Every challenge, every joy, every silence becomes sacred because it arises from the same source that you are. This is the peace beyond understanding, the quiet knowing that nothing was ever missing. The end of the search is the revelation that the beginning was the destination. All along the river does not need to find the ocean. It has been the ocean in motion. When the striving ceases, what remains is life as it is unfolding, radiant, whole, and you no longer seeking, simply resting in the timeless presence that has always been home. And so when all seeking is silenced, when the mind no longer reaches outward, and the heart no longer cries for what it already possesses, there comes a sacred stillness, a knowing without thought. In that holy quiet, you awaken to the eternal truth that the presence you searched for has never been absent, that the divine has never been elsewhere. Life itself becomes the temple, every breath becomes prayer, and every moment reveals the infinite wholeness that has always been. The journey ends where it began, in the awareness that you and the presence are one and have always been one forever. And